I realized this wasn't unique to abortion. It's the central struggle of human civilization, the contest between recognition and erasure, between those who affirm personhood is inherent and those who claim the power to grant or revoke it.
America's founders are calling. It's your opportunity to respond. This is the Liberty Brief Podcast with your host, Robert Melso, featuring Dr. Thomas Giordano.
Welcome back to the Liberty Brief. I'm Robert Melso, your host, and with me is Dr. Thomas Giordano. This is episode 37, and in our last episode 36, Dr. Tom and I were talking about his previous book, An Unbroken Stream. So, Dr. Tom, we've laid out this rigorous framework for understanding abortion through natural law and biology. But as you mentioned from the start, this led you to something even bigger. How did the Unbroken Stream prompt you to write about the sovereign self?
Well, when I was working on the abortion book, I kept seeing the same pattern repeat. Systems redefining personhood when it's convenient. The unborn are potential persons. Enslaved people were property. Women were subsumed into their husbands' legal identities under coverture. Indigenous children had their cultural continuity stripped away. In each case, legal personhood overrode natural personhood. I realized this wasn't unique to abortion. It's the central struggle of human civilization, the contest between recognition and erasure, between those who affirm personhood is inherent and those who claim the power to grant or revoke it. So I asked myself, if this pattern is universal, can we measure it? Can we create a framework that reveals when systems respect or erode the sovereign self?
And that became the sovereign self.
Yes. The book introduces what I call the Personhood Index, a diagnostic tool that evaluates systems across 5 domains: autonomy, dignity, agency, privacy, and continuity. Each domain has 3 measurable criteria, and they are scored on a simple 0 to 2 scale. The maximum possible score is 30. From there, the result would fall into specific ranges to classify the loss or support for natural personhood. 26 to 30 is fully supported. 0 to 9 is denied, and so forth. It's a structural way to assess whether systems treat individuals as sovereign persons or as subjects to be managed.
Well, I'm a simple man. This does not sound like a simple scoring system. Maybe it is. So maybe you could give us examples of how this works.
Yeah, okay, all right. Let's take American chattel slavery, okay? When you apply the index, it scores 0 out of 30. Total denial of personhood across all domains. No autonomy, no dignity, no agency, no privacy, no continuity. It's the baseline against which all other systems must be measured. It's simple enough, right? Now compare that to modern social media platforms. TikTok scores around a 17 out of 30. It doesn't deny personhood outright, but it erodes it algorithmically, manipulating autonomy through addictive design, commodifying identity, violating privacy through data harvesting. The index makes this erosion visible and measurable.
So it works not only on TikTok, but across historical and contemporary systems.
Exactly. Slavery, colonialism, surveillance capitalism, workplace monitoring, ideological conformity, canceling people. The index reveals the common architecture of denial. It shows that erosion isn't random, it's systemic. And once you can measure it, you can resist it and potentially restore what's been lost.
Well, I need you to speak to my wife about that.
Rather,
as a former business owner, I have some right to understand what my employees might be doing. While that might erode their autonomy, it does function to help me manage the business.
Yes, but let me ask you a question. Did you tell your employees as they were being hired that they would be surveilled?
Not surveilled, but they'd be held accountable for their actions.
Well, you would do that anyway. And as long as they know, they're aware of the infringements on their sovereignty, if they sign a contractual agreement to perform under your conditions, that's perfectly fine. But they have to be aware of it, Okay?
Now, one of the ideas you explore in the sovereign self is what you call it the betrayal of Enlightenment ideals. And this is the tension between individualism and collectivism that's shaped the last few centuries of history. And this, to me, is where things get really interesting philosophically. Why don't you walk through your ideas on this tension between individualism and collectivism?
Okay, well, the Enlightenment was supposed to be about liberating humanity through reason, affirming that individuals possess inherent dignity and natural rights, right? But within that movement, a profound split emerged. Two fundamentally incompatible visions of what the sovereign self actually means and where rights come from.
Democrat versus Republican, right?
Not yet. There were no there were no Republicans, first off. No, but it's even more deep than that.
I'm guessing then that the split wasn't just academic. It had real world consequences. Right?
Massive consequences. On the one side, you had thinkers like John Locke and Immanuel Kant, who grounded rights in the individual. Locke said you own yourself, your body, your labor, your choices, and those rights precede government. Kant said persons must always be treated as ends in themselves, never as means. This is the foundation of what became classical liberalism and eventually the American founding.
Yeah, the Jefferson side of things.
Exactly. Jefferson's Declaration of Independence explicitly states that rights are endowed by nature or nature's God. They're not granted by government. George Mason and the Anti-Federalists pushed for the Bill of Rights because they feared federal power would override individual sovereignty.
You know, one could argue that the need for the Bill of Rights pretty much nullified the idea of sovereignty, that the sovereignty that Jefferson was looking for.
Not nullified it. It confirmed it written in the original.
I mean, the need for it. If you need to do that, then you are somehow deficient.
Well, yes, that's because the Federalists claimed, as they all claim, that this was inherent and implicit in the writing of the Constitution. But the Anti-Federalists said, no. We want to see it black on white. We don't trust you.
I think their mistrust was well-founded. But there was another camp within the Enlightenment, though, correct?
That's right. Yes, and this is where it gets dark, okay? Thomas Hobbes stated it with Leviathan, arguing that individuals in a state of nature are so dangerous and brutish that they must surrender their natural rights to an absolute sovereign to create order. Individual sovereignty is traded for security. Jean-Jacques Rousseau took this further with his concept of the general will, or in French, la volonté générale, the collective expression of the people's moral intent. For Rousseau, you're only truly free when you submit to the collective will. Individual conscience can be overridden by collective virtue.
Well, you know, I think it could be said that we can agree that human beings are by nature dangerous and brutish. They can be that and much more. But the answer is really not collectivism. You know, that's why we have another side to us, a virtuous side.
Right.
And the virtue is what the founders were counting on. You know, we've heard this before. It sounds a lot like the seeds of totalitarianism.
It is. Hegel elevated this into a full philosophical system, arguing that individuals achieve freedom through the state, not apart from it. The state becomes the highest expression of moral development. And then Marx takes it the final step. Personhood is entirely shaped by material conditions and class relations. The individual is a product of economic forces. Liberation comes through collective revolution that transforms the structures of production. No?
So you've got Hobbes and Rousseau, Hegel and Marx, the usual cast of characters, all saying that the individual is to be subordinate to the collective. What a great idea.
Yeah, right. And in the American context, Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists represented a vision of this. Hamilton believed individual liberty could only be secured through a strong central authority capable of organizing competing interests. For him, the individual wasn't before the state. They were participants within the state. The Anti-Federalists like Mason feared exactly this, that legal personhood would become primary and natural personhood would be reduced to what the state chooses to recognize.
Well, it turns out, I think, Mason was prescient in this, and history has proved him right.
But yeah, look at what happened wherever these collectivist ideas took root. The French Revolution's reign of terror, Soviet collectivization, Maoist purges, the Nazis' T4 project. Everywhere the sovereign self was subordinated to the collective, whether the state, the general will, historical necessity, or racial purity, mass atrocity followed. This pattern is undeniable.
Well, Dr. Tom, what you're describing is two completely different understandings of human freedom and dignity. So perhaps you could crystallize the fundamental difference between the two camps.
Yeah, okay. Well, listen, here's the core distinction. Locke, Kant, Jefferson, Mason, they all believed personhood is inherent and rights are discovered, not created. The role of government is to protect what already exists. The individual is the fundamental moral unit, and society is built to serve individual flourishing while respecting everyone's equal rights. Hobbes, Rousseau, Hamilton, Hegel, Marx, Lincoln, they all believed personhood is realized through collective structures. Rights are granted by the state or emerge from participation in the community. The collective, whether the Leviathan, the general will, the union, or the revolutionary class, is the fundamental moral unit. Individuals find meaning and freedom by submitting to it.
Let me try to boil this down. You're saying, in effect, that one camp says, I own myself, and the other says, we own each other.
No, that's beautifully put. Beautifully put. But the implications are staggering. If I own myself, then my natural rights can't be legitimately revoked. They're mine by nature. If we own each other through the collective, then rights become negotiable based on what serves the collective good. And who decides what serves the collective? Those in power.
Yeah, that's that little bug that's always in there. These people eventually become tyrants, don't they?
Yes.
If they're not tyrants to begin with.
Yes.
All right, so this explains why the 20th century became the deadliest in human history.
Yeah, and the numbers are staggering. The communist regimes alone killed approximately 100 million people. The Nazis killed millions more. And in each case, the mechanism was the exact same. The state claimed authority to define who counted as a person worthy of rights. The secessionists in America, the kulaks in Ukraine, the Jews and disabled in Germany, the counter-revolutionaries in China, all were redefined as obstacles to the collective good and systematically eliminated.
All right, so let's bring this to today. You argue that this same pattern is repeating.
Yes.
Just more subtle.
Yes.
Just more subtle.
Yes. It's not always violent, but the logic is the same. When social media platforms treat users as data to be harvested rather than persons to be respected, that's denying natural personhood. When workplace surveillance reduces employees to productivity metrics, that's treating them as means rather than ends. When ideological movements demand conformity and punish dissent, that's subordinating individual conscience to collective will. The tools have changed, but the architecture of erasure remains, right?
But we individually submit to that at our own will. I am on Facebook, for instance, knowing that these guys are going to measure my every click, and I trade that freedom for the idea that I get this platform for free.
That's your choice. That's your choice.
And I choose to work for someone knowing that I'll be subject to their interpretation of my work ethic and my productivity.
That's also your choice too.
In exchange for a wage.
That's also your choice too.
In exchange for a wage.
That's your choice. But
as long as it's my choice, my personhood index remains intact.
No, it does not. It's your choice, but you have to recognize that your personhood is being eroded.
Okay, very good. So let's get practical.
And then possibly you could do something to change it, or you can create a structure that architecturally will protect your personhood. There are plenty of ways to measure productivity. You don't have to have cameras in every corner of your factory. There are different ways of doing it. There's, statistical analysis of work output. You could determine where it's going on, but there are different ways of doing it. But as long as both parties recognize that the erosion exists, then something can be done about it.
All right, let's get practical. How does the Personhood Index help us see these patterns in real time? Maybe you could give us a concrete example.
Oh, I'll give you a perfect example. Take China's social credit system. The government tracks citizens' behaviors, their purchases, their social media posts, their associations, even their jaywalking, and assigns them a score. Low scores result in restricted access to trains, to flights, to schools, jobs. High scores get preferential treatment. All right. When you apply the Personhood Index, it scores about 8 out of 30. Autonomy is eliminated. Your choices are constantly monitored and punished. Dignity is violated. Your worth is determined by compliance to state ideology. Agency is constrained. You can't freely participate in society if your score is low. Privacy is non-existent. Total surveillance is the foundation of the system. It's architecturally incorporated in it, and continuity is severed. Your past behavior permanently defines you and no path to redemption. There's no exit, okay?
As I'm hearing you say that, I just feel like that's a very stark assessment for them.
Yeah, but it's accurate. And here's the crucial point. The social credit system is explicitly designed around collectivist principles. Individual rights are subordinated to social harmony and state control. It's Rousseau's general will enforced through technology. This is what happens when you accept that personhood is defined by the collective rather than inherent to the individual.
All right, so that's an extreme case. Can you use the index to measure more subtle erosions too?
Absolutely. A democratic school like the Sudbury Valley scores 26 out of 30. All right? High respect for personhood. Students have real autonomy over their learning. Dignity is protected through equal voice. Right? And agency is substantive, not symbolic. Compare that to traditional public school scoring around 16. Personhood is eroded through mandatory curricula, limited voice, and standardized testing that reduces students to metrics. Okay?
Well,
So-
in defense of these schools, I was what you call your repeat offender. I think a score of around 16 was probably better for them.
Well, maybe. But the index doesn't tell you what system to, which system to use.
Well, I was battling against the machine, Dr. Tom.
Well, yeah, but the index is there to reveal trade-offs. It makes erosion visible so you can respond accordingly. It does not make judgments. It's not a judgmental tool. It is a
That didn't help me.
diagnostic tool.
That didn't help me much back then.
Well, yeah, but the problem was you at the time.
All right, let's bring this back to America. You've talked about Jefferson versus Hamilton, the anti-federalists versus the federalists. Was the American founding ultimately on the side of the sovereign self, or was it simply a compromise that left the tension unresolved?
Wow, boy, that's the profound question. The Declaration of Independence is pure natural rights theory. All men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Jefferson, influenced heavily by Locke, was asserting that personhood and rights are pre-political. Government doesn't create them, it secures them. But then you get the Constitution, and Hamilton's vision starts to show up. The Federalists wanted a strong central government capable of organizing the economy, conducting foreign policy, suppressing rebellion. They weren't trying to create tyranny. They genuinely believed only a powerful federal structure could preserve liberty. But they were willing to subordinate individual sovereignty for institutional stability in ways that terrified the anti-federalists. And this set the stage for a creeping progressive infection of Marxist ideals in the future.
And the anti-federalists demanded the Bill of Rights as a safeguard.
Exactly. George Mason refused to sign the Constitution without it. Patrick Henry warned that the federal government would inevitably expand its power at the expense of individual liberty.
No kidding.
They knew. They insisted that natural rights, speech, religion, arms, due process, privacy be explicitly protected from federal interference. They understood that well-intentioned governments tend towards consolidation of power.
So give me your view. Did the Bill of Rights resolve the tension?
It helped, but no. The tension remains unresolved to this day. Because here's the trap that my father warned me about, and I explore in The Sovereign Self. The moment you write natural rights into law as civil rights, you've implied they exist because the law says so. And if the law can grant them, the law can reinterpret them or revoke them.
Yes, that's the arrogance we talked about earlier. That's the arrogance of codification you mentioned in the book.
Yes, civil rights are well-intentioned, but they're fragile. They rise and fall with political winds. Natural rights, by contrast, don't require a vote. They exist whether recognized or not. The American experiment has been this ongoing struggle between those who see rights as natural and those who see them as civil, between Jefferson's vision and Hamilton's vision.
Okay, and where are we now with that struggle?
We're losing. The administrative state has grown beyond anything the founders imagined. Federal agencies write regulations with the force of law and without congressional authorization. Surveillance is pervasive. Speech is increasingly policed. Property rights are subordinated to regulatory convenience. Privacy is treated as obsolete. We've drifted toward the Hamiltonian vision of institutional primacy over individual sovereignty. That's beginning to change. It's been recognized. And that's why you see people kicking and screaming at the Trump administration, because they're doing something about this. They're addressing it, even though they have not stated it clearly. This is what they are addressing. And I have yet to see something that Trump has done that I do not approve of. Okay? So any naysayer out there about Trump this, Trump that, I know who you are by who you side with. You want to side with the Ayatollah? You want to side with Maduro and Chavez? I know exactly who you are and what you are. Okay?
All right,
but
I think
in any case,
clear.
Yeah, well, the sovereign self is, in part, a call to return to Jeffersonian understanding that personhood precedes government and our rights are our own. This fight is what the Trump administration is now engaging in. DOGE, as we spoke about before, will never be enough because it is not the cost of the bureaucracy that is the problem. It's the existence of the administrative agencies themselves that is the corruption. Okay? They shouldn't exist under the original intent of the Constitution. They are the corruption.
All right, well,
not how much they cost.
We touched on that in a previous episode.
Exactly, but this brought it to a more solid understanding.
Well, let's, for now, stick with the diagnostic framework you're suggesting. Now, we know that diagnosis alone doesn't really create change. What's the path forward? I mean, how do we actually measure and restore respect for the sovereign in our institution?
Well, that's what the final section of The Sovereign Self addresses in this book. And it starts with a crucial recognition. Restoration is architectural, not just rhetorical. You can't fix broken systems by adding ethics committees or updating mission statements. You have to redesign the structures themselves.
All right, well, let's give our audience some examples of what that looks like.
All right, well, take privacy first technology, okay? Signal, the encrypted messaging app, scores 26 out of 30 on the Personhood Index. Why? Because privacy is built into its architecture. End-to-end encryption by default, minimal data collection, non-profit structure that eliminates the profit motive for surveillance. The system literally cannot betray you because it was designed not to have the capability. Compare that to Facebook. You were talking about Facebook previously, which scores about a 15 in the index. Facebook's business model requires surveillance and data harvesting. You can't fix that with a privacy policy. You'd have to rebuild the entire economic foundation of the platform. Okay?
So the restoration requires changing the incentives, not just the incentives.
Exactly. And this is where Thomas Sowell's insights are invaluable. Systems persist because of incentives, not morality. If a system profits from eroding personhood, no amount of ethical rhetoric will stop it. You have to make respect for personhood cheaper than its violation, or make the violation illegal, or make exit so easy that bad systems lose participants.
And, where do you see government's role here?
Well, government's role should be strictly limited to protecting negative rights, ensuring non-interference. The GDPR in Europe is a good example. It doesn't just ask companies to respect privacy. It mandates architectural changes, privacy by design, privacy by default, the right to be forgotten, the right to data portability. These requirements force companies to rebuild their systems.
But at the same time, you're skeptical of government overreach.
Always, because the same government that protects rights can also violate them. That's why the framework of the sovereign self emphasizes distributed power, participatory governance, democratic schools, federated platforms, community control. The more power is concentrated, the greater the risk of abuse. We don't need any further examples of this. All you have to do is look at what's happening around the world.
What's a federated platform? I don't understand that.
A federated platform is a decentralized platform. Take blockchain, for example, for the currency. That's a federated platform.
All right, I understand now. Tom, we're running short on time, but I want to end this with a question. What's ultimately at stake in this conversation? Why does the distinction between natural and legal personhood matter so much?
Rob, it's the difference between freedom and tyranny. Ask the Iranians what they're going through right now. If personhood is inherent, if I own myself by nature, then no government can legitimately strip that away. My rights are mine, whether recognized or not. I can resist. I can refuse. I can say no, even to overwhelming power, because I know my dignity isn't granted by others. But if personhood is legal, if my humanity is conditional on state recognition, then I'm always one redefinition away from erasure. The state that grants personhood to the unborn today can revoke it tomorrow. The state that protects the disabled today can deem them lives unworthy of living tomorrow. Once you accept that the state defines who counts as human, you've handed it a weapon that can be turned against anyone.
And I think, as we discussed before, you are seeing this play out in the abortion debate, in surveillance technology, in ideological movements.
In everything. That's why I wrote both books. The Unbroken Stream shows how this plays out in the abortion context, how denying the natural personhood of the unborn opens the door to denying it for others. The sovereign self expands the framework to show that this is the central conflict across all of human civilization. Recognition versus erasure, inherent dignity versus conditional status, self-ownership versus collective control.
So what's your call to action for our listeners?
A few things. Number one, buy the books. Yeah, buy the books. It'll help you understand.
Look
Basically,
links down below this podcast.
Okay. All right. It's a shameless plug, but hey, what the hell? Three things. First, learn to recognize the distinction between natural and legal personhood. Understand that systems don't grant your worth. It's inherent to what you are. Second, use the Personhood Index to diagnose the systems you encounter. When something feels wrong, whether it's a workplace policy, a platform's terms of service, a government program, measure it against the 5 domains. Make erosion visible. And third, refuse to participate in systems that deny personhood. Exit when you can. Resist when you can't. Build alternatives when possible. The sovereign self must be lived, not just defended in theory.
So it's a call to action for individuals then, not just systems.
The sovereign self will be released in short order, probably, in early this year, maybe in a couple of weeks, right? But we're building a community around these ideas now. People can join the conversation, access additional resources, and stay updated on the book's release at the same time, at the same site.
All right. Well, Dr. Tom, thank you for joining us again on the Liberty Brief. And thank you to our listeners for joining us in this in-depth exploration of natural personhood, the Enlightenment's great bifurcation, as Tom put it, and the ongoing struggle for the sovereign self. I think I've learned that these aren't just abstract philosophical questions. They're foundational. The foundational issues that determine whether we live as free individuals or as managed subjects. Remember, as Tom said, personhood precedes permission. Your dignity is inherent, not granted. And the work of recognition begins with seeing that clearly. So with that, we'll end this podcast. And until next time, this is the Liberty Brief. Stay free.
You've been listening to the Liberty Brief, based on the book Unalienable, What It Really Means and Why It Matters by Dr. Thomas Giordano. If you want to help spread the word, please subscribe, like, and share using the links below. You can also check out Dr. Giordano's book on Amazon using the links as well.